come out on this lovely day. Welcome, and thank you for being here. The forum committee is the sponsor of this, and we try to bring to the community subjects that are of interest and or concern to the members. Really, this one is of interest. Today's forum we have entitled, only slightly tongue-in-cheek, as the Science of Sheep Grazing, or Sheep Grazing, the Science of it, because our speaker, Leland Falk, takes a slightly different approach in the energy and intelligence he invests in not only understanding what he's doing and how to do it, but what the consequences are and what the logic of it is. And he's going to talk to you about that. But for just a second, I need to do a little business and tell you the exits are here, and the bathrooms are the little house across the garden here. Are there any member announcements about coming events or other items? Okay, then I give my usual couple of future forums for you. The next forum in February is going to leap from sheep to mountain lions. And, that's an accidental segue. The speaker Matt Nelson has done work with looking at tracking cougars and their behavior in other areas such as Colorado, and it's going to give us some update about that and observations about our own backyard. Fortunately, most of us never see them, even though I'm told they see us all the time. I guess I'm more comfortable wandering around on a late evening walk without glancing over my shoulders, wondering where they're hidden. In any event, that'll be February. March, we're going to follow on with a sort of continuum in the solar energy, alternative energy world we've looked at a couple of times in the past year or so, maybe a little more. We're going to talk about the net grid, about what Sonoma Clean Power is doing and what the local power group is looking at with the ability to plug solar energy into the grid on a different basis than when you right now merely get to use it for yourself, and if it isn't used, it kind of goes to waste. Now you have a different way to participate, and that's going to be explained. And I'm glad someone else is going to do it besides me, because I don't understand it. So, and then in April, we will have the usual candidates forum for the Sea Ranch Board, and it's escaping me at the moment. April 14th or 16th, it'll be out in the bulletin, it's going to be a special forum on the Sea Ranch Chapel. The Jim Hubble, the guy who designed it, is going to be a keynote speaker on that. Others will include folks who actually helped build it originally, and at least in my case, I'm very curious to meet the mind that could conceive of that particular building, much less design it and get it built. So it should be a very interesting, well-attended forum. Okay, with that concludes the announcements, so I'm going to move on and turn this over to Leland Falk, who is the manager of the sheep grazing program here, and who has been doing this for some time. I have asked him to include in his talk some comments about how do you get into this business? How did you get into it? It's an unusual calling. And second, I had asked him about also the manner in which you approach it. It isn't mechanical. It's a purposeful effort to understand how to manage the genetics of your sheep, how to look at the effects they're having on the landscape and that sort of thing. And so it's an unusual job with an unusual approach being done by an unusual guy. So, Leland?
I guess I'll take unusual as a compliment. Thank you, Lee. And I wanted to start off with some thank yous and welcome everyone tonight. I hope everyone had a lovely holiday and a Happy New Year. We're starting the next one, and so may the clouds come in and bring rain. So anyway, just some thank yous to get out of the way. I want to thank the Sea Ranch Association, the community manager, Frank, John Prescott, Bill Wiemeyer, security, the F&R crew, and the guys I work with from the water department as well. This is a community-supported program. I mean, all of you guys help fund this, and the association helps make it happen, and everyone comes out to help when there's a problem, get the sheep back in, whatever the problem is, get them across the highway. Everyone drops what they're doing, comes and helps us, and it really makes this a lot easier and makes us able to operate a lot more efficiently. So a big thanks to the Sea Ranch community and the people that run this place. I really appreciate it. Also, thanks to my dad and Jackie for always being here to help out with the sheep. If I want to go out on a date night, they're my fallback shepherds. So. Another thanks to Hartney and Sarb and Sea Ranch Woolworks for setting everything up there. Hopefully you guys swing by and look at the tables. A lot of this stuff that's there is from wool produced from here on Sea Ranch that we had spun, and they're making into very beautiful stuff back there. So swing by and take a look at that. And then last but not least, my wife Danielle, thanks for putting up with the shepherd. Gone all the time. It's a 7-day-a-week job, and now we have our own little lamb here. Delaney will be 1 on the 12th. It's my wife and my new baby daughter. So thank you. So getting into shepherding, how did I get in? I'm a 5th generation rancher from here on the coast. I grew up in Sturts Point on a fairly large ranch. We didn't run a lot of sheep. It was mostly cattle and timber. But it was a ranch that's been in operation for almost 140 years, so sustainability was pretty high on the priority list. And so I went to our local schools around here, and then I went to Santa Rosa Junior College, where I studied natural resource conservation and animal science. And then the Sea Ranch program, the grazing program, was started in '02, I believe, and by Charles Richardson, a relative of mine from Sturts Point there. And they had approached him. Sea Ranch obviously had, a pretty bad fire danger problem at that point, and so they approached him, and he brought sheep in from out of state and just kind of went for it. There was a lot of trial and error in this. Nobody had really done anything like this before, at least not in the States. They'd been doing some of this overseas, but using this electric fencing, being completely mobile, going right next to houses, all of those things was kind of new for everybody. I mean, even the people that were coming over from Davis trying to advise us, they didn't really know what was going to happen. And so it was definitely shooting from the hip to start with. I took over the program in '04, the end of '04. I was home from the summer and working for Charles, and he wanted to start a family and decided that he didn't want to be a shepherd and be a family man. I didn't understand him that well why. So I took that over from him, and this year is my 10th year doing it, so I was pretty excited about that. We got my 10th year of business here on Sea Ranch, and So I've been here for a little while now, so that's pretty exciting. So now that's the background of it a little bit. Now kind of getting into the program. Kind of what we have going on here is I run a herd of about 320 mother ewes at this point. We used to run more, but it was too high intensity and we couldn't get our animal performance where we wanted it. And so we cut back the numbers, but we can still keep up the acreage and we have a lot better animal performance. So what we're running at is, when I say there's 320 animals, and you guys have seen the electric fence out there, and we move them anywhere. Some fields in the winter time, if they're a small field, could be a 12-hour field. So we're moving them a lot. On average right now, it's about 24 to 36 hours per field. And the vegetation varies a lot, so that could represent 3 acres, that could represent 7 acres. You can't really say each acre takes so long because it's so variable, the density is so variable from field to field. And so, you can go to the next slide. So lambs, everybody loves lambs, we have lots of lamb photos. So that's why we're here. We've been here for about 10 years. And so what's needed to graze the sheep? Obviously we need some shepherds. We have people setting up fence. You've probably seen myself or one of my workers out there moving fence around all the time. It's nonstop. I don't have dogs. I have used dogs. I don't give them to fresh shepherds. I make my guys work at least 6 months without a dog before I give them a dog. Because when you have a dog, it speeds everything up about tenfold, and we're going by everyone's homes, and we don't need 300 sheep and their lambs running over you guys' decks. And a dog going 10 feet one way or the other will make that happen. So I make them learn how to handle animals with their feet and with their hands on the ground, and then after that, I'll introduce them to a dog, and then they can really start herding and being really efficient. So next slide. Another lamb photo.
I went.
Okay, that's fine. So everyone keeps asking about lambing. If you guys were here last time, you would have heard me talk about lambing in March and April and why we do that, and I have lambs all over the place right now. Well, if you don't pull your bucks out soon enough, they'll rebreed. So we have 2 facilities here on Sea Ranch that the association fixed up one of the old pens, the Monarch Glen pens there. They're just south of us, and we use that facility, and there's another facility right north of the White Barn there where we do shearing and stuff. And so if I don't get to those facilities in time and pull my bucks out, or else I have to basically chase them down and tackle them in the field, they can rebreed if we didn't get by soon enough. And so all the bucks rebreed all my ewes, and so now we have a bunch of beautiful lambs out in the field. But it's in January at least, and this is not a bad month to have lambs because typically we get some dry weather, and so they're all doing nice and happy and healthy. And I'm just a little out of sync, but next year, and I'll go into that. We'll be back in the March-April routine. So that's kind of why there's lambs right now. So we go. Here is one of the facilities, and so we're working up here in this picture, running animals down the chute, and we do this for various reasons. Just checking for general health issues. Sometimes we might trim a foot. We'll check their teeth to make sure they still have all their teeth. We do worm them once a year. It's kind of the same stuff you're going to give your dogs for fleas and ticks and stuff like that. It takes care of some of the internal parasites that they get here. And then we also have the pens. We do shearing. Next slide. Shearing comes just once a year here on Sea Ranch. Next slide. We can't produce the highest quality of wool because we're so close to the ocean. And so if you have that really dense, thick, heavy wool, the sheep can't shake the moisture out of their fleece. And so it can actually rot and mold on the sheep. And so you typically in coastal areas, you have a lower quality, a looser wool. Its crimp isn't as tight. And I actually have a lot of hair sheep that don't even have wool at all. You'll see them in the spring. A lot of people I know are confused by it. They have big patches of wool sloughing off of them. They look like they have mange or something. And those they're mostly Katahdin genetics, and they don't have wool, they have hair, and they get a big coat in the winter time, and then they shed it out naturally in the spring. And you don't have to shear them, and so you don't have to dock their tails. And there's actually a link from where they originated from. Most of the hair breeds originate from very tropical areas, so there's a link between the hair gene being naturally parasite resistant. So that's one of the benefits of raising hair sheep. And then it's a sweeter, milder meat. When you go to eat it, they don't have the lanolin production because they don't have all of the wool. And so lanolin production relates to the must of the taste. So you get rid of lanolin production, you go to a sweeter meat. Most people in here might say, oh, I hate lamb. It's so musty and so gamey and so strong. That's because you didn't eat good sheep. So that's kind of in our shearing next slide. So this is all the pins, you know, there's with the lambs in there, there's all the lambs on the left, they're all multicolored. This is a couple of years ago, we had some black bucks in there, hair bucks, and so you've got really cool coloring. So this is, we're sorting them off here and weaning the lambs. And then all the mother ewes and stuff are in the back. Next slide. So this is our shearing trailer. These guys come in. This is a lost art and workforce here in the U.S. It's every year it gets tougher and tougher. I do kind of have a couple of core guys, but there's a deficit of sheep shearers in the U.S., so you cannot have all the sheep cannot be shorn in 1 year in the United States. You cannot get the labor to do it. I overpay, so I make sure I get the labor up here. If I paid commercial wages, they would kind of just throw me to the back whenever they could, which I'm kind of there anyway, but I always try and overpay just so I can get the help I need. And there's a couple of guys that come up, they bring this mobile trailer, they back up to the chute. This is a professionally built trailer, and it makes their job a lot easier. The floor's tilted a little bit, they have their stand set up, the sheep are made to tip over onto the ground a lot more efficiently than just grabbing out of a pin and rolling them and stuff. And so these guys are really nice. Last time I had 2 days notice. I was scheduling, we had a 2-week block, and they came out and said we're coming up in 2 days. So that's what you're kind of dealing with when you're in the shearing business. I mean, if you have 3, 4, 5,000 head of sheep, it'll be different. But for me, being a smaller producer, it is always tough to get the labor and to get real high quality sheep shearers. Every time you take a pass on a sheep and you shear, if you go back and take another pass in that same area, you cut really small pieces of wool, and then when Harmeet gets it and goes to wash it, somebody's getting frustrated. And so having that skill set, there's a big ripple effect down the line in the quality of your wool. And so that's just a little bit about shearing there. Slide. More lambs here. So when it comes to lambs, you know, we raise up the lambs typically 3 to 5 months of age and wean them. We're doing high intensity grazing here, so the sheep are fenced in smaller pens, and we're moving them a lot. And so when you raise up a lamb, it's sucking milk and getting most of its nutrients that way. And once it starts to graze, and the mother starts to naturally wean it, and you graze off a field, its profile goes first. Instantly, its profile is gone because it's going off the most tender and lush stuff out in the field, and all the big dominant ewes are going to eat that first. So when they get 3 to 5 months of age, depending on the average age of the lamb, we wean them, take them down to another location where they have a lower stress environment and they perform a lot better. If I try and raise them up in the herd, moving them around all the time, grazing off fields for fire hazard reduction, I don't get the performance out of my lambs, and then it's not good meat, and it's not good replacement use. And so we raise them up, and then wean them and pull them off, and put them in a 100-acre field, and let them go cherry pick it for 3 months, and then they just explode. They grow really well. They do really well that way. And then actually, once you get them up to about a year, you can bring them back, and they'll be fine, but they just can't compete with their mothers. So next slide. Goats. We got our one goat there. We used to have a lot more goats. When they first started the program, it was just sheep, and then they had brought, the Sea Ranch wanted Charles actually to bring in more goats, so we did. And then I've kind of gone through them and gotten rid of almost all of them, except for a few. They had made a mistake when they started. Typically when you bring animals from outside an area into an area, you want to go from a harsher climate to a more milder climate, and they did the reverse of that. And goats don't do that well on the coast. They don't like the rain, and if you have rain, you need shelter for them, whereas the sheep and cattle, they don't have those requirements. And you got to manage them differently. You know, you can put 300 head of sheep out on the coast and have a storm come in and they'll be fine, where goats need that shelter. And so they don't winter well here, and then that's just a ripple effect of health problems. And so I've just gone down to a few of them that I keep in the herd, that I don't breed them or anything, and they're nice to have, and they would benefit Sea Ranch in some ways more than the sheep to have more of them, because as a rule of thumb, sheep eat with their head down and goats eat with their head up, so they're getting those different profiles. But they need to be run in a separate herd. They can't be run with the sheep. I need to manage them differently. They have different mineral requirements. And then just with the weather and trees and grass and all the different variables, that they need to be managed a little differently. So that's kind of where we're at with the goats. Next slide. It's my wife out here working sheep with me before she was pregnant. Everybody loves puppies. So these are some guard dog puppies I got. And I don't run guard dogs in here, but this is my lead in here to predators. And I know Matt Nelson, he's a great guy. So we don't run guard dogs here. We don't have that much of a predator problem. The reason we don't run guard dogs is because I'm sure you guys don't want to hear a dog barking all night right next to your house. It's bad enough even a half a mile from you. And we don't really need them. We have very few predator problems. I'm not even going to say every year we have a problem. It's every other year, every couple of years. A few mountain lion kills. I've had a coyote get in one time. The electric fence, for the most part, if a predator walks up and gets shocked by the fence, it's going to scare it enough that it's not going to want to come back in. And plus, we're so mobile, and all the houses and all the activity that's going on in Sea Ranch. If I have a kill in one neighborhood, I move to the next, more than likely that predator isn't going to want to venture into the next neighborhood. So for the most part, the predator issue is very, very small here. Other areas I have really big problems. And that's where we put the guard dogs in, and they do really well. It's changed my life in certain areas, just having a guard dog. So I will say they're a wonderful mechanism. Next slide. And they're cute. So the fencing, everybody loves the fencing, right? When it comes to fencing, kind of how we've always done it, and it was really hard to figure out from the start with the association, where do we put the fence? We know the common areas where they are, they're in between all the houses, right? But where do you really put the fence? Everybody mows to a certain degree out in the field. Everyone's property lines goes out into the field in a certain way, and it's really hard to figure all that out. There's deer trails, there's human paths, they are plants for screening, there's plants that people want gone. And so our rule of thumb is we go to the mow line. It just simplifies everything. I can't spend my whole life out there looking for every property corner. And so we go, some people, and over time, we learn the neighborhoods and learn some of the owners, and we do what they want. We'll try and do that year after year. But we just go to the mow line, it simplifies everything, and we really like game trails because it gets the fence flat down on the ground. It's not going over brush. It's not touching a lot of vegetation, so it's working better. So we'll go down like this, you can see we're only 15 feet from someone's house, down off the hillside, and that plunges down off there, that's above the lodge, that photo, and right here where the photo was taken is a cul-de-sac, and we're watering them off there. And so we do have, sometimes stuff comes up, everybody has their favorite bush in front of their house that they don't want grazed. I'll be the first person to admit, when we come through, management happens. And so, but when you live here and over time you see the process, everything regrows and comes back greener and healthier. And so that's kind of part of the sheep program. But sometimes, when there's only one bush in a field and they attack it, it's not very aesthetically pleasing at the end of the day. But I will say, if you don't want me to graze the bush, please tell me beforehand. Can't do anything after it's gone, so. Next slide. So this one, Mel, is for you. I don't know where you're at. This one's for you. This is a video. It's crossing the Highway 1 here. It's a little grainy. We pulled out the fence across the road, put up some stop signs, stop traffic. You know, we're moving almost 350 ewes and another 120 lambs. And so this is at the north end. This video is just from a day or two ago. And the tunnel is right there where that red truck is. And I've tried running them through the tunnel before, and it's hard to push animals down into a black hole. And golfers are very impatient.
Reluctant.
So you'll see those little lambs looking at the lines and stuff there. When they get a little older, it can even get trickier. They'll be running up to that and they see a yellow line or a white line and they don't know what it is, and so they'll want to stop, and so it's always an obstacle.
That's right.
And so that's about how long it takes to move across the highway. You have 2 minutes on to each side of that, and we're there to move them. And that's with small lambs there too. And so that actually was a nice and easy move. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to get in and start talking about grass a little bit. Here we're moving sheep. This was from a few years ago. And we had a few more goats in the herd there. You'll see some of that grass is pretty tall. It's coming up there to, 2.5 feet on the sheep or so. You'll see some gray grass in there, and that's some of that older vegetation that's oxidized and hasn't been eaten or broken down yet. Next slide. Here's some lambs and a mom, and if you notice, you look at the field and you look at all that dead, dry grass out there. And so, kind of the whole idea of grazing, the idea of the program is fire hazard reduction. And so on Sea Ranch, they have, I think, 10 control plots and 10 test plots all over the ranch. And we go and graze one and not the other, and there's a botanist that comes in and does a survey every year. And I think since the program, and it's kind of stated about that, there's been a 50% reduction in thatch, and that's the old, dead, dry grass, year to year. So that equates to a 50% reduction in fuel load, which is, probably a success if you were to measure that. And so, as we come through and we graze off a field, the grass grows up and you graze it off. And there's 2 ways that grass can break down. It's chemical or a biological reaction. And the chemical is oxidization. That's that dead grass standing there. It doesn't fall down on the ground. Your grass grows up and nothing touches it. The sunlight bleaches all of the nutrients out of it. It gets rained on. It's still standing. What's going to break that grass down? Purely just sunlight and wind, maybe a little bit of wind. And so if you take that old dry grass, or when it's green and you pass it through a sheep, it becomes a biological breakdown of the grass. And you actually want both. You want some oxidization and some biological breakdown. And so you come through, the reason you want both is because you don't want the sheep to eat everything. We take 50% maybe. In the springtime, we can take up to 75%. But you always want to leave armor on your landscape. That's really important. This is a giant solar panel we have out there. And so if we take it and deplete it, and we graze it off to dirt, where our solar panel go? Where did our armor? Where did our armor for water infiltration and for erosion go? And so we never want to see bare dirt, and that's one of the great things about mob grazing is we're in an area for such little time, you don't have the big dirt patches, you don't have the trailing and the gullies and stuff like that that you see in conventional grazing. So it's always important, as much as everyone wants that extreme lawnmower effect, to leave behind some armor for the ground. And so next slide. So here you can see old dry grass and green grass mixed together, which is what you want. And so our loop around Sea Ranch this year is been faster than it's ever been, because this is the third year of our drought here. We don't know if we're out of it yet or not. But also I cut about 3 months of grazing off last year off the north end. So I wasn't up here by the golf course or by tall grass or north of this last year. I came through here. There's a few plants that we have here in Sea Ranch and on the coast in general that are toxic or can be toxic at certain times of the year. And so last year when I was going through here, it was just going to be really bad timing on the loop in, and then I was going to hit the azaleas at the wrong time as well, and both of them cause nervous system breakdown, and you don't want them there's just too many toxins, and you don't want them on those plants at certain times of the year. Other times of the year it doesn't matter, but an azalea blooming, it smells like a lollipop, and they can't stay away from it. And then the lupin at certain times of the year as well, in the spring, when it's real pungent, can cause a nervous system problem. So I just had to take and cut across the highway, head back south, and just skip this whole area. And there's not much I can do about it. It's not like I can really load up all those sheep, come back and regraze it, and then go back south. It's kind of, you've got a hidden area or not when you come by, and that's a once-a-year rotation. And so by cutting off those 3 months of grazing from these plants, and then because of the drought, I think this year in one of the spots we were back to in about 8 months, which typically on average rainfall years, it's a 12 to 16th month loop. And so there's a lot of recovery in that time. I actually think the drought has been the best thing that's happened to the vegetation on the Sea Ranch. It's allowed me to get around faster. Sometimes 16 months is too long. There's too much buildup of thatch there. The plants get too mature and too coarse, and the quality of the feed goes down. And plus, the brush outcompetes me so much that I can't keep up with it. And that's because of so long in between grazings. You know, twice a year is ideal, but you know, and once a year where we're at, it's still doing a really good job. Next slide. Another picture here, and you'll see I put this one in here because when the lamb's laying down and you see that dry dead grass knocked down on the ground and green grass growing up through it, and that's what we want to see. That right there is putting carbon in your soil, it's protecting your soil, it's leaving a little bit behind for wildlife, for birds, for deer, for all that, and it's still reducing the fire hazard. And so when you have our grasslands here are very mixed, a lot of non-native, a lot of native species, and it doesn't really come down to you have native species and your annuals outcompeted your natives. It's not quite that simple. That's what a lot of the original thinking was, is that they just outcompete them, they're too vigorous, and our native perennials can't keep up with that. It also has to do with the quality of the soil and the life in the soil. If the soil's not right for our native plants, then their seeds won't germinate. You know, you can't stick a seed in sand and expect it to grow. Not that our soils here are sand, but that's just an example of it. And so, and it actually has to relate to the carbon in your soil. For every unit of carbon that you put in your soil, it can hold 8 units of water. And so if we have depleted rangelands, depleted soils from improper grazing, from improper management, you have this very little carbon in your soil. That's your water holding capacity. It should be up around like 7% would be ideal, and most of the rangelands are about 2 to 3%. And that's just from improper management. Our native plants were developed under a grazing scheme and fire. You know, we have our large herbivores that were here at one point, our elk and antelope, and they're not here anymore, at least not in the numbers they were. And they moved very random and sporadically around the environment with large predators chasing them, bears, you know, lions, coyotes, wolves if they were here. And so that's a lot of chaos going on all the time for the rangeland. And then, you know, as settlers, we came in here and settled land and put animals on it, and they grazed it year round. Well, that just sucked all the nutrients out of the soil and put it into the animals, and then it changed the soil type, and then it made it more conducive to non-natives to grow. And so a lot of it is just over time healing the soil with proper management will allow for the right soil conditions for our native plants to grow. And so and it takes time. In certain areas, it may never be achieved because this landscape has also been manipulated. You know, everyone's house, your drainage dishes, your piping, your plumbing, all that stuff that's in the ground, the roads that we have, the way the stuff drains, it might not allow the soil to actually get back into that condition it needs for these plants to grow. Some areas you see it and they never left. They have been here all along. Some places they have come back in where they weren't before the grazing program. And so there's a lot of variations in all of that. I hope everyone's kind of following all that. And so that's kind of just a brief explanation of the process of soil and native plants. And so what it's really called is the liquid carbon pathway. So you have your plant grows up, you know, photosynthesis happens, it sucks sugars down into the roots of the plants, and then the plants uses that and forms roots, and then you come by and you graze off the top part of the plant, the roots retract, take that energy, and they leave behind carbon. That is the shell of the roots, the most basic element. And so that's how you cycle carbon into the soil. As you grow your plant up, harvest it, the roots die off, the plant regrows, you harvest it, you know, the roots die off, and so it's just a cycle, and you build carbon. But what you don't want to do is be at the same spot every time, year after year. It has to be random and sporadic for it to work correctly, which is great on Sea Ranch because it's very easy to achieve that because there's so much going on here. Whether they decided to mow a field, whether it was too wet to graze a field, whether I was bad timing on the lupin or the azaleas. So I'm never in the same spot at the same time of year. It's impossible to do here, really. And maybe I was grazing someone's lot for the last 5 years and they finally built a home there. So then that just sped me up, and I'm going a little bit faster in a certain area now because there's not as much grassland there. So all those are the variations of what we have to work through when we move around Sea Ranch. Next slide. This is how lamb chops are made. I just really like this photo. I thought it was great. Next slide. Here's another one. This field here is a poor field. You can tell just looking at it. You know, it's not happy and healthy looking. It doesn't have a lot of volume to it. You can see where that land is, how transparent that grass is there. That's an area that's it's arid. There's not a lot of biological activity in the soil, so it's not going to sustain a very healthy grassland population. Next slide. Here we'll talk about, I touched in it a little bit earlier about genetics a little bit, and I wanted to kind of touch back on it again. You know, we had our animals, you know, our native animals, you know, it took tens of thousands of years for them to develop to these areas to be healthy animals. And so we bring farm animals in here and we, you know, have to give them our wormers and stuff like that to keep them healthy. Well, you can also climatize animals, and you just have to be have a very hard thumb when it comes to culling. And so you can always increase your genetic productivity by, when we run through those alleyways and stuff like they're picking out the weak links. You know, that's one of the big problems with the animal industry is that we keep the weak link going, and we take that animal and treat it, and give it antibiotics, and put it back in the herd and rebreed it. Well, what did we do? We just carried the weak genetics into our herd and are incorporating those weaker genetics. So what we want to do, if we have a health problem, if an animal is thin, anything happens, we want to cull it from the herd. And it gets shipped off to the auction yard, and it goes into the animal industry. And so it takes a long time. You can't do this in 1 year or 2 years. And so it took here about 5 years to produce a decent lamb crop. And so here at 10 years, I feel like I can finally market land to people and be proud of that product. It has a lot to do also with the grassland, but we had to adapt and climatize the animals to the landscape and the situation. And that just goes through selection, you know, and we call our ewes 3 times, our ewe lambs, before they come back even on to Sea Ranch to be a grazing animal. So if there's anything that comes up within the first year, we run through the pens 3 times and look them over. They're not going to come back up here because I don't want to have, you know, for lack of a better term, a welfare sheep. You know, I want a lamb or a sheep that's going to take care of itself, that gives birth to twins in a range environment in these conditions. I don't have to help her give birth to those lambs. They come out, they're on the ground. Those lambs right there, probably a couple of hours. We made her move, you know, 150 yards. And the ewe's in good condition. She's not thin. There's no hip bones sticking out. And it took 10 years to get there. This doesn't happen overnight. And it's one of the problems in general with the livestock industry. It doesn't stop at sheep by any means. So that's kind of a brief thing on genetics, and it might sound a little bit harsh, but that's something that has to be done, that we have to actually go back to get us off of giving animals so many antibiotics all the time. And it goes just straight to culling. Next slide. So here we're looking at, this is a really nice field. This is on the south side of a drainage ditch. And so it's kind of out of the wind so the grass isn't really burned. But what you're seeing is those bunches of grass, those clumps. So those are our perennial grasses. That's what we want to see. When you see a field and it has that bunched up balls of grass, that's a perennial plant. That's a resilient landscape. Perennial plants, they stay longer, greener throughout the year. One of the reasons they get out competed is because our annuals go to seed much earlier than a perennial does. Our native perennial seed in the fall. A lot of annuals are seeded in the middle of summer, so they can throw their seed out ahead of the native perennials. And so when we see something like that, that's an indicator of a good, healthy grass. Next slide. Here again, you know, we're looking at the bunch grasses. You'll see some of the older grass there, some of the dry gray stalks there, and mixed in with mostly green. So when I say that your native perennials stay greener longer throughout the year, that directly relates to a more fire resistant landscape. Because we can go through, and even if there's two feet of grass out there and graze it off, and maybe it's only 6 to 12 inches at that point, well, those perennial plants will regrow, and they will be green, and we can graze them off in June at the start of our fire season, and in 2 months they're regrowing, and that's a green landscape in August, September, which it's hard to burn green grass. And so that's why it's really important to have perennial plants. And perennial plants, because they stay greener longer throughout the year, they actually are a healthier feed for our animals. You know, if you have that, if an annual goes to seed and we don't graze it right before it goes to seed, it will die, it will put out its seed, and it will oxidize, and then we basically are eating carpet. We're eating iceberg lettuce over and over and over again. And you can look around on Sea Ranch, and we have a lot. If I put together a 10-hour slideshow, I have a million pictures. And in some of the spots, like rattlesnake grass is gone, and that's one that dominates. Everyone likes it because it's a very uniform crop and it waves in the wind and all that stuff. But it's a horrible plant for our soils, for nutrition for our wildlife, nutrition for our sheep. And so what a perennial plant builds soil and an annual depletes soil. What an annual does when it grows its seed sprouts, and it grows up, and it puts down roots. And then before it gets to seed, it takes all the energy in its roots and pushes it towards the seed head to produce the seed. So it's just sucked all the nutrients and biological activity out of the ground into its seed head for its one shot at life. Whereas a perennial plant, they store their energy in the root ball at the base of the ground. And so that's why we really like our perennial plants. Here again, we're seeing this one here is mixed grassland, and we're looking at lands here. These, the white ones, and then you can see this white one in the front and the middle, and then the fluffier one next to it. So there you're looking at the difference between a hair katahdin and then our traditional commercial whiteface. And that's like with the genetics I was talking about. One of the reasons I went to the katahdins was because of their being naturally parasite resistance, them not having wool and having to deal with it, and then they're just a hardier sheep in general. When they get wet, if they get rained on, they don't have all that wool grabbing on the water. They just have hair that will shed. They pop up. They're up and going, these lambs, half an hour to an hour after they're born, they can walk and we can move them. So it's always important. What we do when we move sheep, sometimes you'll see a mom left behind with a lamb, is we like to try and wait 12 hours, maybe 24, for them to bond before we mix them up with all the other ones. So sometimes we'll wait, we'll leave them behind till the next morning and then move them up so they don't get, sometimes moms will steal lambs, or sometimes if she gets stressed out, she might abandon one of her twins, which they don't call it a bummer lamb for no reason. We have one baby in the house, we're trying to keep it that way right now. And so here, this is the flock. And that's it for the presentation.
Thank you, Leland. I was hoping you'd conclude it with something about mob grazing, a term he used. For me, that brings up the image of a dozen snarling, snapping wolves attacking an entire old buffalo. I think he had something else in mind, and I wondered if you might comment on that before we take our break.
Okay. So mob grazing. It wouldn't be one buffalo, it would be millions of buffalo. So mob grazing, there's a lot of terms for it. It can be mob grazing, it can be called high intensity, low frequency grazing. And so what that is you take your animals and you bunch them up into a herd. All sheep, goats, cattle, camels, horses, they're all gregarious animals. They're made to be herded any way they want to be herded. They don't want to be put out on 1,000 acres and have 100 animals roaming 1,000 acres. So mob grazing is you herd up your animals, you bunch them up, and then you move them around the landscape and feed them your vegetation that you have, as opposed to putting out animals on landscape and just letting them freely graze it. And so what we're doing here is we're mob grazing, or high intensity, low frequency grazing. Does that help explain it?
Are there benefits to that?
And so the benefits of that will be, thank you, Lee. A lot of it is the foot action, and then the dung and the urine. And so when you have animals, and we're talking, if you take 320 ewes and times that by their average weight and put it on an acre, we're talking about 50 to 60,000 pounds per day, per acre per day is what this herd runs. It's actually lighter than that. That's if they're on a 1 acre block. A lot of our fields about 3 acres, 5 acres. And so then that number will get cut down. And so you have all those animals running over all that vegetation, just like that right there. That's mob grazing. They run over all that vegetation. Whatever they don't eat, they press into the ground with their hoof, and then they urinate or defecate on it, and that makes that biological breakdown. And that's what our native perennial plants want. That's what how they were formed, with our elk herds roaming around here and our antelope, with bears and mountain lions chasing them as they were scared. So they're gregarious. Their only defense mechanism is numbers, and the one that breaks off and is not in the herd gets eaten. And so that's how all of our native plants, they were formed under that grazing mechanism. And so when we go and we do this, we're simulating that grazing mechanism, and it stimulates our native plants in turn. That got it? All right. So I want to touch one other thing I forgot. I just want to talk about the wool real quick. I didn't get into that deep. So we have, I told you guys to take a look at our neat stuff back there, and I just wanted to talk about the process of the wool. And so you guys saw the shearing trailer there, and I said we have a slightly lower quality than what can be produced here. And so when we make the wool, it's really tough to produce this right here, this scarf. We have no infrastructure left in California for processing wool. It's all been outsourced. And so when we go and we want to have this in our fiber shed, we want to try and keep it local and sustainable. It's very, very difficult because there's just no industry left here. It's all been outsourced. And so we have our sheep shorn, and then we try and have it washed at a local as we can be, even though it's hundreds or thousands of miles away. Local mill, and then spun, and then we have local citizens make all of the apparel that is to be made. And the infrastructure is starting to come back around, and it's getting easier to market localized products, but we're still not quite there. And so, as much as we would love for everyone in this room to have a piece of our apparel, it's hard to do that and offer it economically because the loss of the infrastructure. 100 years ago, we could have done it right here at Sea Ranch and made everything here, but it's no longer here. So if anybody wants to invest in a barn, I'll rent it.
Okay, we're going to take about a 10-minute break, come back maybe 5 after or so, and then you can ask your questions. I know what I'm going to want to hear about is, what if we want to buy some land? We'll see you 5 after. Thank you. Start drifting toward the seats. That would be appreciated. Give us a chance to go into our question and answer period.
I don't know. You're on your own.
Folks, you can take your seats. Appreciate it. We can get on with the program. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I remember. You and Mom riding around in your sports car.
Is he in here?
We're going to open it up now to questions. Once upon a time, we used to have a microphone over here in the corner, but nobody wanted to use it. And everybody says, I'm sure everybody can hear me. Which they can't. So please, Walt's trying to record this, so if you really could speak up a bit with your questions, it would help get them recorded and make it even easier for Leland to hear.
If you want to be on the video, you got to be someplace where we can see you. You can't sit in the back and say,
Well, that's not going to bring anybody to the front. Okay, so go ahead with your questions. I want to step aside and let Leland handle them.
Go ahead, I'll repeat the question if you want to ask there in the back that you stood up.
My question is, do you let the sheep with the hair breed with the wool sheep, or you try to keep them separate?
So we have, it all is based off the bucks. So the ewes aren't breeding other ewes, hopefully. And so we bring in hair bucks and breed them to everything. And then I have another small herd that I try and keep just for wool. But at some point, the majority of the sheep here will be purebred hair sheep. It takes about 3 or 4 generations to breed the wool off of a sheep. So, you know, it's 50% wool sheep the first time you breed it, and then it's 25%, and it just keeps getting cut in half. And then you'll get down into where it's pretty much 100% hair genetics. So I had another question that somebody asked me at break. Why do we feed the sheep? So we're probably seeing us out there right now throwing a lot of hay out. The nutrition plane is a giant bell curve, basically. In the middle of the summer, there's the most amount of nutrition in the feed out there. And right now in the dead of winter, most of the green grass out there is just full of water. There's not very much protein or carbohydrates in it. So we need to level off the nutrition plane. And that's what supplementing them late in the fall and through the winter does. It's also a great management tool. Whenever we feed, we always try and focus on brush or the heaviest thatch areas. So if we want the animals to congregate in a certain area to speed up the process of what they're doing, we will throw the feed in that area on the coyote brush, in the lupin, so they will really mob that area, and it really has a great effect. So in the middle here, you have your hand up, yeah.
2 things very quickly. When a new lamb is born, how long does the umbilical cord remain on it?
When the lamb is born, how long is the umbilical cord? It usually dries up in a couple of days, and then within about 2 weeks it'll fall off.
And secondly, could you briefly describe the various types of sheep that we see, the black faces, the white faces, etc.? Thank you.
Okay, the breeds of sheep that we have. Most of the slick white ones and the brown ones, or the spotted dairy cows ones, are going to be our Katahdin genetics. I have had some Dorper bucks in the past, which are like the Katahdins. The black face are going to be some type of Suffolk or Hampshire cross in it, but most of the stuff out there now has at least 25, if not 50% hair genetics in it. I kind of, at this point, when you have your herd and you're monitoring the breeding, you more or less have your own, we have our own breed at this point. I'm not going to say it is any one pure genetics, because we've crossed and I've had different kinds of so many different kinds of sheep over the years that it's more or less our own breed. Like if we took these Katahdins here and you tried to compare them to Katahdins in other areas, they're not going to be completely the same. Here in the front.
What do the sheep not eat?
What do they not eat? Whatever you try and hand over the fence to them. They don't, there's a few natives out there, they don't like the coffee berry is one of them, is very, very, has a lot of tannins in it, and so they just don't like it. They won't, even the goats won't touch it. Certain times of the year they actually won't eat the lupin. Certain times of the year they won't eat poison oak. What else don't they eat? The iris, at certain times of the year they don't eat. That's something I always try and really mob the sheep over the top of. When you get those huge 5-acre patches of iris, it's not a healthy grassland. You shouldn't see 5 acres of dominating iris. You know, it should be smaller patches next to other smaller patches. But mainly the most grazing resistant plant here on Sea Ranch is the coffee berry.
What about those thick bunch grasses down by Galleons?
Those, they do eat, that's a native grass, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. There's those, some of them have such a thatch buildup that they won't eat the dead thatch, and then some of it's so thick and so coarse that the sheep physically can't eat it. They do eat, and I try and throw a lot of feed, hay in there when I'm in that area to really get them to mob it, break it down. And then when those plants grow back and they're lush and green, they'll graze them off a little better. That would be one of the areas where I would say that it's probably not the right species. We could have a lot more, if you measured it purely in fire hazard reduction, I would use cows in that area. It was my own property, because just purely the weight of the animal would help break that thatch down, that 40, 50 years of thatch build up and cycle it. It'd be managed the same way as a sheep herd, but it's just a heavier animal, and it would help cycle those different plants. In the back there?
In terms of weight, how much does a sheep eat and drink?
So, depending on time of year, whether it's bred or lactating or milking, anywhere from about 3 to 4.5% of their body weight they eat a day. And then water is from nothing to a gallon a day, maybe a gallon and a half. That's extremely variable. It depends on every individual field that we're in. Right now we can go fill up the troughs and they might drink 20 gallons out of it. Even with feeding them hay, it just time of the year, if they do have wool on them or they have full coats, it's hot out, they're going to drink a lot more. If it's cold and it's raining out, they're not going to drink any water. And if there's really wet and there's a lot of really lush green grass, they're probably not going to drink a lot of water. Over here.
First off, thank you. This is one of the highlights, I think, really, of the Sea Ranch, what you're doing, and I know it's a lot of hard work.
Thank you.
And certainly from a fire management, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's perfect. So are you aware of other people doing things like you're doing?
So, sadly enough, after 10 years, this is still very cutting edge. There are, and because of Sea Ranch, I've actually been contacted by our local state parks, and they have a request for a proposal in, and on a property that was going to be a vineyard, but it's not going to be. I'm not going to say what it is, but everybody probably knows. They also are bringing in. We're doing a project there. It's, this type of grazing program has to be driven by the people. Our government's not going to do it, and the problem with most of our publicly owned land is that when they did have animals on it, there was leases originally in place, and probably in the environmental movement, they ran a lot of the ranchers off and violated lease agreements, and now it's such a legal mess at the state level. That's what I got told like a month and a half ago. It's such a legal mess on the state level for our public lands. They don't want to do leases, they want to do contracts, because the lease thing, people have there's a lot of places that have historic rights, grazing rights, that are still on the books, but they're never going back, and they don't want to open up those can of worms. So on a place like this that's privately owned is where innovation is coming from, and it's going to take quite a few more years. My foot in the door in the state park at this moment, the people that I'm in contact with, they are justifying it purely by habitat restoration. We're doing work for the viola flower, which hosts the silver spot barren butterfly, which is an indicator species in our coastal environment. So we are purely focusing in on grazing just to stimulate the flower. They know all the other ripple effects of the grazing program, but that's how they're trying to justify it at this moment. So it's kind of frustrating, but here in the front.
How do you get the electricity into the fence?
How do I get the electricity into the fence? So we have, that's another reason that this technology wasn't available 20 years ago. The electric fence actually started off with a guy hooking a distributor up to a wire and shocking himself a lot, and then finally isolating it. And so we have a small 60-watt solar panel, a basic deep cycle battery, and a regulator, and then I put grounding rods out, and the fence, all the horizontal wires are electrified, and it sends a pulse through the fence. Like every second, a blast And you gotta have about 2,000 volts to keep animals in. And if it's really working good and you grab it onto the ground rod and you touch the fence, you might get 6,000 or 7,000 volts. Very low amperage. I like to tell people it's like a bee sting without the welt. And so it's great. It's I get all my stuff from a company called Premier. They're out of Iowa, and they are actually use their own products, so they produce a really nice product.
Thank you.
Yes.
Back to this question just a few minutes ago about other opportunities. What's kind of the minimum amount of land that works for a program like this? Or the maximum as well?
For me, you can't have a place too big. I have a lot of people request small projects. I don't really want to go into anything less than 40 acres. Small stuff, 5, 10 acres, 20 acres. If you look at it from economics, it's just cheaper and more efficient to go mechanical, to use machines. If you want to pay for proper management, then that's fine. But I also don't like to do short-term projects. I like long-term projects. I like to do something and see the results years down the road. I don't want to go do grazing. It's not going to really benefit the land to go graze something one time, you know, and then not come back for 5 years. It's just, I might make some money, but it's not something I want to do. And so the smaller stuff, what I like to tell people, if you have a 20 or a 40 acre or a 100 acre place, is to get a hold of your neighbors that have livestock and work out some type of program with that. That's the best way for small communities to manage their animals is to herd share and to run each other's animals on each other's land instead of having to truck animals in from an outside location. But you're also going to try and convince some, middle-aged rancher of that, and that's not going to be easy as well. In the back.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier innovation happening in places like this. And so I'm curious as to what are some of the things you're looking to that you may need to do some more innovation with?
You mean in terms of here on Sea Ranch?
Yeah.
Things that for more innovation, I need a full-time IT guy. Here, my ideal situation is we would have another herd for like 8 months out of the year. I think Sea Ranch is undergrazed, in my personal opinion. And so that would be one of the things, and it would require probably to run 2 herds of 24-hour shepherd on site, which is something that people would, they would have to have a shepherd's trailer out there and all that stuff. But our frequency here is too low. These plants want to be grazed probably twice a year. And so that's one of the things that I think would take it to the next step. And then it's always, facilities, you can always upgrade your facilities and make it a little more low-stress livestock handling. It's tough. This place it's always tough when you come into a place because, especially where they had livestock and then they developed it and they want to bring livestock back, because everyone wants to use the same spots. Like a natural place for animals to lay is the same place you want to put your house, and it's the same place the Indians had a church site or something, It's the nicest areas on the coast, and every animal, human, wants to use it. Animals flow, I like to say they move like water. You have to be able to flow in and out of an area, and so, when all of this landscape was designed, it wasn't thought, there was no consideration for animals moving through here, and so you come up to a lot of barriers, and the animal's like, I do not want to go here, I want to go there, and that's between 2 houses and buy a BMW. And so, it's always tough coming into an area, because you're working against the barriers that we've set up because, this wasn't thought about in the original planning. There in the back left.
I'm curious about, you mentioned carbon content in the soil ranging from low 2% or so in rangelands to 7%. What is it here? How is it?
I don't have, I talked with Wiemeyer about it, and he was going to look into doing a soil test. I don't know what it is here. I know that it's going to be both sides of the spectrum because the landscape here is so variable.
Do those test and control plots you mentioned, measuring the fire hazard reduction, could those be used to measure?
Yeah, they absolutely could be. Yeah, and that's probably what they will end up using when they do that. There's one in the very back I want to get to.
You mentioned IT. How do you use technology in what you do?
Well, I haven't been keeping up as much as I should. I just have a website, and then I have an app. And the website is we linked it to Google Earth, and then we try and update it to where the sheep are at. So any homeowner can go to the cranchsheep.com and see where the sheep are at. The one thing I want to add on there is direction of travel, but you know, I've been told that it went from being the seals to now the sheep are the most photographed thing on Sea Ranch. And there's a lot of people, and the association gets a lot of calls. I get a lot of calls. Not everybody can keep tabs of where the sheep are at. And so I try to set this up so people can come, and there's actually a link on the association website, and so they can pull up. Everyone wants to use a piece of technology, even when you're vacationing, and so they can go to the website, look, people can bring their grandkids or their kids, it's something to do, come up and find the sheep. And then I had the guy that was working for me before, he made an app so I can automatically update that from the field with a smartphone, which is really cool, so I don't have to go back to the desktop and move around a little thing, I can just clink and up it. And then we actually built an app, but it's for Android only, that is for the sea rancher or the visitor, and they can download it, and then that will lead them by walking, biking, or driving to the sheep. And it will tell you the shortest path, whatever you're doing, so whether you want to walk or get on the street and drive. And then it gives you a weather update next to it. So we haven't released that, a few people have it on their phones, but you know, that's just something that's fun, you know, and it's something for people to interact with. You know, I'm sure that the ladies at the front desk of the association office get tired of the 7th call where the sheep are at today, you know. So it's just something to kind of take away, you know, take some stress off of that workload, and something for people to interact with. And
Don't the sheep have a Facebook page?
the sheep also have a Facebook page, the Sea Ranch Sheep, on Facebook, and I just take photos and update where they're at and things that we're doing just for people to interact. And so I have a lot of people contact me through that, about what's going on and stuff, you know. You guys probably aren't necessarily the Facebook generation, but there's a lot of Facebookers that come up here. In the back, there.
Vegetarians won't like this question, but how old are the sheep? Are you finding a market for your lambs, and how old do they stay, you know, alive?
In terms of finding a market for my sheep, like is it selling lambs or the calls or whatever, there's always a market for them. We go down and we ship animals out and go to the Petaluma Livestock Auction, and there's people, animal products are used for everything in the world. We're all have animal products in our makeup and all that stuff, and so in our clothes, it's all over the place, glue. And so I just take it down there and let the rest of the industry handle that. And then the lambs, I'm going to release probably about 40 lambs for public sale this year, sometime in the middle of summer, and that will be out of our facility in Sturts Point, and we'll have a commercial freezer set up. And I'll advertise that when they're ready and they're all processed. We'll have to ship them down to Occidental probably and have them processed down there. And then they go to another facility and they're cut and wrap, and then they come back up here and we'll put them in a commercial freezer and people will be able to come buy cuts. So.
What would a lamb sell for? Butchered and ready to go.
If you bought the entire thing, it'd be anywhere from $600 to $800.
Oh, wow.
So everyone's saying, wow, but let's do the math here. If you get 50 pounds of meat, you know, divide that by 1,000, you know, what is that per pound? $20 per pound. If it's 600, that's, you know, $12 a pound or whatever. You can't go and buy lamb for $12 a pound in the store. You can't buy organic, you know, grass-fed, locally produced anything for less than 15 or $20 a pound. So it sounds like a lot when you buy a whole animal, but really for what you're getting, I'm not, you know, getting rich off of it by any means. You know, I probably have at least 50 or 70% into that. Mel.
Do coyotes or bobcats give problems? And what about the raven I've heard with
I have in the past, we've had problems, and I've kind of learned how to deter it a little bit. You know, we've had problems with ravens. They're very opportunistic birds, and sometimes they might peck the eyes out of little lambs when they're newborn. He brought it up. It happens. Sometimes bobcats can be tough because they're fence jumpers. Coyotes, 99% of the time, will not ever jump a fence. They'll always go under. It's out of the norm for a coyote to jump a fence, and so if they walk up and they try and dig under the fence and they get shocked, they're gone. Bobcats and mountain lions will jump right over like it's any other tree or limb or log, unless they're walking up and sneaking up, and then they touch the fence. So you're always going to have that problem. You know, the best thing that I can do is just move out of that neighborhood and go to the next one. You know, with lions and stuff, what I do now is I kind of know the areas where they have most likely to occur them, and just simply parking a vehicle in a different area, letting my dog urinate on a certain log or tree, because I can find the trails. I'm not as good as a tracker as your guys' next speaker is going to be, which I recommend you guys come and listen to him, but I know how to track a little bit. And so you can find game trails or more likely areas that stuff's going to flow in and out of, and you know, a mountain lion might know your scent and your dog's scent, but if something new comes into that area, then it's gonna put them on alert, and then it's gonna be harder for them to commit to coming in and killing. And so I always try and look and think of that. And then plus there's the, you know, everyone calls in and they say they saw a mountain lion, and so security always gives me updates if they think there's one in the area, and I always pay attention to that, and I might skip a couple of fields, or I just will do whatever I can preemptively when I come into a neighborhood if there's something going on. But it's very variable. We'll do in the back there.
Have you ever used llamas for protecting?
Have I ever used llamas before? Yes, I have. They're very frustrating. Llamas are kind of like for canines, and that's it. Mountain lions will eat llamas just like they'll eat a sheep. They also are very, they're kind of herders. They'll herd the sheep a little bit. And so when I go and I got to run 300 mother ewes and another couple hundred head of lambs across a 4-foot bridge to the next field, and I have a llama hesitating at the bridge, holding everybody up, it can get real wild real quick, and then when it jumps off the bridge down in the creek and I gotta go pull it out, it starts spitting on me. And so I don't really need them, so the point of that is I don't really have coyote problems here on Sea Ranch, and so the llama wouldn't be really the right application of a guardian animal. Right here.
What breed of guard dog do you use?
I've used several. The puppies that were in the picture were Akbash Anatoly crosses. People hear a lot of the Pyrenees is the most common one. They're also the most human friendly. The hardest thing with raising guard dogs is over socializing them. You will ruin a guard dog real fast by petting it and saying it's a good dog. You basically have to raise it like a sheep. They're more or less wild dogs that are bonded with the herd. If you raise it and you keep it in your house till it's a year, it's going to bond with you, and you are its herd. So we take these pups at 8 to 12 weeks, and we put them out with the herd in a very controlled environment. I don't go stick a pup out, you know, and come back 2 weeks later and see what happened. And so you want to make sure they bond as a pup with sheep that are friendly to guard dogs, because you also have to bond the sheep to the guard dog if they're not used to being around a guard dog. And so it took quite a while. Typically, you know, only about 75% of guard dogs are actually good guard dogs. And so then you have to, you know, relocate them or find other homes. A lot of times if you would just take them and give them to someone else or sell them to someone else and you put them in a different environment, usually they'll do better. Sometimes that just typical environment won't work. for that individual dog, and so then if it goes to a different environment, sometimes it will work. I have, you know, a lot of problems on Highway 1, bicyclers going by, and, you know, then your guard dog wants to follow the bicycler, and then it's out on the road all of a sudden. And so I like my guard dogs, I can't even touch them. I mean, I get from you to me from them, and that's it. You know, we go put feed out for them, and that's it. Right there.
Why do you have a goat in the herd?
I just have a few goats left from the, when we had a lot more. We had probably 200 goats here at one point. And so I just have a few that were real friendly that I liked. They had personality. They didn't get out very much. And they're just kind of fun to be out there. They're actually great grazers. They do a wonderful job in the coyote brush. They'll climb up in it and knock it down, where the sheep can't really do that. So, you know, ideally we would have more goats because they would do a better job on the coyote brush and the fir and the pines and all the encroachment species.
Are there areas on the Sea Ranch that are not grazed for a particular reason? For instance, the BMW, the two houses, whatever the constraints are, and are there areas that you would think would be advisable to graze that are not grazed?
There are a few spots, and sometimes, every year we go more and more areas and try and include more areas. You know, I'm not going to load up this 300 head here and move it, so wherever we can run to. I do bring in the summer and graze above the lodge with a small herd and just graze there for like a couple months, depending on how many animals I bring in. And that's the only one that's trucked around because I can't get the animals from the Moonraker pool there and get them across the road and up into the meadow in a loop. See, because you can't just graze dead end down at the end of 500 acres and then run your animals all the way back across that grazed ground. It has to be a loop or a figure eight or something like that. So you can graze your way in and graze your way out. And so there's some spots that are just really difficult to do that. Sometimes, you know, if I don't want to work for 3 days to graze 1 acre either. I can spend a tremendous amount in labor in setting up electric fencing just to get the animals there for 12 hours, and we're spending more time setting up and taking down the fence than the sheep are actually grazing. That's very rare, but that does happen sometimes. Some of the spots we don't graze are in the northeast corner of Sea Ranch there, past the golf course where it opens back up. We're not going north of the golf course really, you know. I don't even like being around the golf course that much. I'm there right now. Be a lot of footprints on the putting green. But, so there's another spot there between East Moonraker and Annapolis Road that could be grazed with some work. You know, we'd have to block off the trails. I think that's an area that's grazable. The homeowners there would have to allow me to go through their yards right up to their house because it'd be hard to get the fence on the upper side until we had some trails established through there. I think that's a grazable area that's not grazed. I think there's not many areas you can't graze if you really want to get them in there. The biggest restraints are going to be roads and public trails. I try not to block off the trails, but sometimes you just have to. Some of the fields are just shaped too weird or they're too small, and so I'm just going to have to block off the trail for 24 or 36 hours or whatever. In the back?
Is it ever possible to witness the shearing?
Is it ever possible to witness the shearing? You know, the shearing is, I go back and forth with the shearing. You know, there's a lot of interest in it, and it would be really cool to put on like a real big show and almost have a festival out of it. But that's happening here, you know, in your guys' place. But also, it's, you know, sometimes the sheep get cut up a little bit. There's a little blood in shearing. You know, sometimes people have a hard time with that. The sheep do have to be put down on the ground and they're manhandled. And sometimes, you know, there's a little bit of a social problem with that. A lot of times it's just educating people. They just don't know, you know. But, so I go back and forth. Sometimes I just like to get it done and get it over with so I can keep working. Because I'm not making any money doing that. But it would be fun to put on so everybody can come and see it and all that. And And I don't know what the long-term answer is to that. But we have, one more vote to have a big shearing day, so maybe it'll happen next year. In the front?
So, following up on that, if I get what you said earlier, eventually there won't be any more shearing?
We'll always maintain a herd of wool sheep on Sea Ranch, just so we can be able to market local products and stuff like that. I'll have the majority of them will be hair sheep, but I still will keep some just for wool production so we can keep producing stuff. Because there is a market for it, but I'm more concerned with animal performance and efficiency. My competitors inland can produce a lot higher quality product, a lot easier than I can. But I will always maintain a small group of wool sheep here on Sea Ranch. Yes, in the back?
You've mentioned the electric fence a few times, and I emphasize the word electric. What should we know in terms of touching that fence or telling our house guests?
Don't touch it. If you have a pacemaker, you probably shouldn't be around it. People's dogs, I just had somebody, right on Christmas Eve, and their dog got shocked right in the face, and he was more upset than the dog was. And I asked the guy, I said, "You didn't teach your dog to read?" And, just kidding. We always try, and I'm always harping on my guys too, to put up electric fence signs. It's the last thing we do. It's the last time you walk around the field. Put up all the electric fence signs at all the corners where all the intersections are. And it's something I'm always telling my guys to do, and I know when I'm not there, they skip out on it sometimes. And so it's electric fence. It's made to keep sheep in and humans and predators out. And to tell you the truth, I don't mind if someone's dog gets shocked, because that dog is trained for the rest of its life never to chase sheep, and I fixed everyone's problem. I don't have to worry about my sheep getting killed, them run off the bluff on the highway. People tell me when their dogs get shocked, they walk on the far side of them away from the fence. And so it's a training. As much as people want to, get mad at me about their dog get shocked, it's a dog owner issue.
And is it the whole fence generally electrified?
If they're out of the fence, then it's not all electrified. So there's a lot of variables. So the way the electric fence works is, it's like you stick a knife in your wall socket. You're going to ground out that circuit. So we have suspended electricity around the horizontal wires, and you touch it, you ground out the circuit. If the ground is very dry and arid, then it's probably not going to work very well. What I have to do late in the summer a lot of times is actually wet down my grounding rods, so there's more conductivity in the soil. Some spots we're just never going to get late in the summer a charge in the fence, maybe for 100 feet, because the ground's so arid. There's a bunch of gopher holes there. There's no moisture left in the fence. And then you can go another 100 feet down there, and it's going to surprise you. And so that's just one of those things, if the sheep are all trained, what I like to do if they're getting out or we're having problems actually is build a real small field, a real tight field, and in a wet area, and then wet down the grounding rods and get a real good charge in it. And then that one sheep that is figured out that the fence is down, not electrified, they'll retrain that sheep. So when they get out, a lot of times it's one animal or two animals, and they scoot under the fence, and then the other sheep think it's time to move. They go back, everybody runs. The guys in the front can't stop, the ones in the back are still coming, they just go right over the fence. It's a psychological barrier. It's not a physical barrier.
I actually saw that happen about a year and a half ago and really panicked, because like you said, it looked like water flowing out of that one little hole.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, they're going to be jumping over the bluff and all that. It didn't run that far, and then they just stopped and started grazing.
Yeah.
If that happens, I ran home and called the security, and they already knew at that point. But is calling Sea Ranch Security the right thing to do?
Yes, we have it set up, and I have on the website, my personal cell phone is up there, and then it's just easier a lot of times to call security, and they can call either my shepherd that's there, they have his phone number working that day, or me if they can't get a hold of him, instead of someone trying to call me and then I don't recognize the number and I don't want to pick up, and then he goes,
Or me, and Jackie,
yeah.
when they're really desperate.
Yeah. And so the security, they have the all the numbers to call if they get out or whatever, and they handle it. Thank you. In the back.
How do you identify the sheep?
How do I identify the sheep? In what terms do you mean?
Like, do you identify each one individually? You have like this one's been burned and this one's had 2 litters and.
So when we run them through the alleyway, we just use a chalk stick, and everybody gets it all at once. So you don't want to just worm one animal out of your herd and not worm the other one. You want to take and clean all the parasites out of them, and then move on. And so they're all on the same schedule with all of those types of things. And so I don't put ear tags in them. There's too much brush in Sea Ranch. It just rips them out. And so I like nice, clean, full ears. I don't need a bunch of ripped up ears on my animals. And so I basically, when they get older, they let you know. They start to get a little leaner in the fall. They're not doing as well. They're moving slower. And so, it's time to call. If I have an animal, when we're working on the lambs, that's obviously hasn't had a lamb, they have no bags, they haven't bagged up, they never have, then I'm probably going to call that because they haven't had babies. But I'm not writing down this animal had 2 lambs last year, 1 lamb the year before. It's the ear tag thing and all the brush. It just makes it too difficult. And I don't necessarily need to do that. My business plan isn't based on a commodity market production. I don't have to have every lamb every year. That's not the most important thing to me. It's based on grazing and fire hazard reduction here on Sea Ranch. And so I always consider my lamb crop as my end of the year bonus. If I did a good job and sheep are healthy and I have a lot of twins, we're doing well. And so that's kind of how I base that off of. Right here.
How old are the lambs when they're slaughtered?
We typically like to get them to the 120-pound range. You get about 50% yield off the lamb, so if we get up to 120 pounds, you can get 50, 60 pounds of meat out of them, and that would be about a year. See, because I don't have the big, huge, black-faced commercial production sheep, they butcher them about 8 months. If you follow the norm of the industry, you have your lambs now and you butcher them in the fall. But we have a smaller sheep here, and I'm not going to finish it on corn or grain. And see, they're taking those animals, and they're taking to a feedlot, and they're graining them out and fattening them up. We'll take an animal, and if I have it at the right time of the year, my bucks are in there at the right time of the year, we lay them out March, April, we raise them up till the next year, and then February, March, April, June of the next year, the grass is at its best. The animal is fat on grass, and we can market a truly grass-fed animal that is fat, it's tasty, you're going to have more fat than you know what to do with. And so that's what we want to do, and it takes a little more age that way. If you went to the industry standard, you couldn't market it as lamb. Lamb has to do with the development of their front joints. And so once that development has formed, it becomes a spool joint, and the meat packers in your commercial lamb facility are going to kick that to the side, and it's not going to be lamb, that's going to go to a custom meat market, and they'll probably sell those lamb anyway. But I like to take them to a year for these smaller breeds and to finish them on grass.
Do you send both the males and females off?
Yeah, so we'll castrate the males, and then so they become a wether at that point, and they fatten up real nice. And so yes, both sexes go.
But you don't keep the females from breeding?
I do. I keep a certain amount. Yeah. So the real nice ones that have the real nice maternal traits, we'll keep for replacement ewes, and then the ones that don't have necessarily the maternal traits, those will be eaters. Right there.
You've made several references to the performance of
So, happy, healthy, and thrifty, you know, it has to do with the health of your landscape and then obviously the health of the mother. And so we want our lambs to perform. That means they're making their daily gains. They're growing every day. It means they have a slick, shiny coat. It means they're being lambs. They're running, they're jumping, they're thrifty. You don't want to see something that's dull, that's not performing. And so when I think of performance, I think of health and weight gain in lambs. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. Right here?
Does anybody in California or anywhere in the States produce used milk?
Yes, there's several sheep dairies around. Sonoma County actually is one of the leaders in the state. There's not very many. It's a lost industry. If I'm going to throw one out there, I'm going to say the Bellwether Farms out of Petaluma there. It's a lady that produces some stuff, and there are some other ones that popped up. I visited her farm before, and she has a really nice operation and produces a really nice product. What I'm doing here, there's certain breeds for milk production, and we don't have those breeds. And so when you have, and you really got to be on your nutrition game when you're into milk production, and so you got to have those beautiful, nice, lush pastures all the time to keep that milk production up. And so you would consider us a range operation, and that would be more of your farm operation.
How much does a fully grown ewe weigh, and what is the gestation period for a ewe?
Anywhere from 150 to, if you have a monster ewe, it could be up to 250 pounds, but that's not a sheep I want. I want the smaller side of that. 150 to 200 pound ewe is an ideal ewe for me, and gestation is 5 months. Yes?
What would be some examples of maternal traits that you would see in the lambs?
They're not trying to breed the other ewes, one. So like a big nose, a big dominating eyebrow to snout, rigid nose would be a masculine characteristic. You know, a more slim, dainty, feminine muzzle, or on a sheep would be one. One that stays with the herd, that's not branching off and wandering on its own all the time. Something that has nice wide hips, that can ease a birth. You want, chest girth as well for a big heart. A big heart directly relates to your fleshing ability, which is the ability to gain weight. So those are a few of the things that you would look for. Any other questions? In the back?
You only spoil sheep when they go lame automatically? You're done?
What? Can you repeat that?
When they go lame? Do you cull when they go lame?
Yes, I do. Because that's what Mother Nature would do. Yes?
How often do you have to rotate the butts or sell the butts so that you're not...
I probably typically will keep them for 2 years. 2 breeding cycles, and then I'll cycle in some new ones. A lot of times not every year, but I do actually close circuit breeding. I raise my own bucks and produce my own genetics because I don't want to bring a buck from a couple counties over that's raised in someone's backyard getting fed corn and hay all day and bring it up here and incorporate those genetics into what we got going on here. I'm just working against myself at that point. So I will always take about 10% of my best buck lambs, and I will not castrate them, and I'll raise them up, and then I'll take a couple out of that and keep that for my own breeding stock.
How many years can you reproduce? What's the reproduction?
Here on Sea Ranch, if we can get 5-6 years out of a ewe grazing here on Sea Ranch, this is probably a slightly higher environmentally stressful situation for animals than your backyard farm. And so we're making the animals move, we're making them eat coarse vegetation. Most of the time, their teeth are going to wear out first. That's most of the problem I have. And so if they don't have any teeth, they're not going to be able to efficiently break down and chew up grass, and then they're not going to be able to maintain their weight. And so most of the time, and then they're also their feet will give out. Yes?
How does the grazing program interact with the gopher population?
We have here, I keep getting told we have about a 2-fold increase in our falcons and hawks because of the grazing program. I know another place where they did a test, they said they had a 5-fold increase in our birds of prey. What it does is, when you run the herd over the top of them, it does a couple of things. It breaks down their tunnels and disrupts that. And then it also actually opens up the vegetation so that bird can get down and actually successfully hunt. You know, it's hard for a red tail to land in 3 feet of grass and grab a snake or a mouse. You know, it needs 6 inches or a foot. And so we actually get hawks, some of the red tails and some of the falcons following the herds around, going after gophers, mice, snakes, all the time. You'll see them. If you really watch what's going on, these animals are keeping up to a certain extent until they get to the next bird's area, and so they'll follow them around. We see it all the time, and so it's good. They'll disrupt them. You know, if there's certain areas we can magnify. If I took and threw, 3 bales of hay out over a huge gopher population, that's going to set the gophers back for a little while. Gophers work, actually, we did a lot of studying on gophers. Gophers have a dominant male, and then they have their females that live around them. And so, a lot of times you want to take out the big dominant male and then collapse his network system, and then that will disrupt the population. And so they'll maintain an area, and then they have their females on the outer edges of that, where moles are just random and sporadic. Any other questions? Right here?
Do you get any help from UC Davis at all?
When the program first started, we worked with them quite a bit. They're still stuck on feeding everything corn. That was kind of a joke. That's the traditional school system is they're still stuck in the mainstream production of everything, and it just doesn't really fit what we're doing here. I work with the junior college some. They seem to have a little more innovation and open to different ideas, where when you get into the university system, and the kids that are going to school there, they're there to learn that curriculum, and it's hard to get everyone to break out of that. If they're going to come out here and I'm going to tell them we're going to do grass-fed and we're going to lamb out in March, and then they're going to go home and the professor's going to tell them no. And so I only engage with people that want to engage with me.
Do you cooperate with another breeder where you can crossbreed for better genetics and things like that?
A little bit. I have somebody that I get bucks from, but there's another outfit that runs similar sheep to mine, but not quite what I want. The tough part about sea ranches, it's kind of swampy in areas, and a lot of places other people are running sheep is higher and drier, and so I have more foot rot problems than most producers, and that directly relates to genetics. And so it's really hard, like I said before, it's hard to bring an animal. A lot of people say you're going to have to climatize your animals if you bring them more than 60 miles. That much of a change, the animal is not going to excel in just 60 miles of landscape. And so I just try and stay away from getting linked in with that. If I was a commercial producer in Valley Forge, it might be different. But for what we're doing out here, no one else's sheep genetics are hardy enough. They're too frail. My number one thing that I look for is just pure hardiness, just performance on our environment with no other inputs. Yes?
Leland, what do you do with adults that you have to call?
They go down to the auction yard for the most part, and then they go down what I call the pipeline. There's a lot of things. There's a guy down there I know runs a meat market, for people that can't really afford high-end meat, and so he buys call ewes and butchers them, and a lot of it is ethnic food, and so where they don't have to have the perfect juicy chop, they're gonna put a lot of other stuff on it and make it tender other ways. And so I see a lot of stuff like that is going on. You know, and then there's, you know, it goes to the lower end of the market, which is still getting consumed. Some of them might go to dog food. If you go to a big slaughterhouse, you know, they're taking all the hides and they're tanning them and they're using them. They're in everything. And so all that animal is, it's getting used, every single piece of it. And it's just so much more efficient. I mean, I can try and market that, but so much more efficient the way that the industry is set up to let the industry handle that part of my business. Yes, in the back?
Leland, this used to be a big sheep ranch. Were those wool sheep mainly then?
Yes, they were. It was a commercial wool production. I just had someone come up to me and tell me at the break, it was funny, and that they knew somebody that was raising sheep, and they had to stand them up in the wintertime because they had so much water in their fleece just to get their legs working again, just for circulation. And so this was a huge commercial sheep production ranch, you know, and they had, you know, zero regulation and they could do whatever they wanted. And so, but it didn't succeed either. It failed because Sea Ranch is here now. And so, it worked here for a while, but I know the history of what they had here, and they had all the same problems that I have, but worse. You know, and the highest and best use was changing the use of the land at that point. Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up.
Well, I told you he was an unusual person with an unusual approach. And, I think he's shown that. If, before we go, folks would help put away the chairs, that'd be much appreciated, and thank you for your attendance.
$5. Yeah.